A Centaur's Life is one of the most tonally inconsistent, bizarrely paced, strangest series I think I've ever seen. It's in such a way that I find it difficult to know where to even start. It jerks the story in tone in spontaneous and confusing directions, so it's really hard to know what you're supposed to take or feel from it. So I'm going to start exactly how it presents itself, based on the synopsis and the general feeling you'd get from looking at the promotional images. A Centaur's Life is primarily about Himeno Kimihara, who, as the title indicates, is a centaur. Along with her friends, Himeno goes about her daily life as a monster girl. But that's a dishonest description, because the truth is a lot stranger. The world created by Mei Murayama is meticulously crafted. He's taken our familiar world and inhabited it with these countless variations of human-animal hybrids. And then he takes great care in showing all the unique ways the population interacts with the world. How they live, how they use certain items, and how the world caters to them in ways that just make sense. Take, for example, Himeno. Being a centaur, that means that she takes up a lot of room. So if she were to be in a traditional classroom, navigating through all those desks and chairs would be very difficult. So of course, she's seated at the back of the class in a specialized chair that can accommodate her size. And this consideration is extended to all of the world. Of course, the goat girl would need a bent hairbrush to get under her horns. Of course, the mermaid people would all stand while moving around their school. If they swam, their books would get wet. I mean, it makes me wonder why they just don't have waterproof books, but the general idea is still there. It's generally quite interesting to see our world reimagined as this place accommodating to all these wants and needs. It makes our familiar world new and refreshing. And it's delivered in such a casual, immersive way. It's not just monster girls in our world, it's our world if we were monster girls. Or men, monster men. There are men in this, like this thing here. It's supposed to be a cat boy, but it looks more like Snorlax. In a world full of monsters, pity the one who's considered a freak. So I'm going to answer a question that you're probably curious about, and that's, how does a centaur use the bathroom? I'm kidding, of course. That would be a weird thing to talk about. Instead, let's look at how did everyone turn out like this. And it's actually explained in great detail in episode 1. To keep it short and somewhat understandable, somewhere along the evolutionary line, animals with 6 appendages outlived animals with 4 appendages, aka us. They went on to evolve into humans with animalistic traits. There are 4 main species: centaurs, angelfolk, merfolk, and fauns. And a secret 5th species, the Antarctic snake girls. What's an Antarctic snake girl? I have no idea. They explain it and I still don't get it. Like, they say they're closer to birds than snakes. I don't get it. There's this really funny bit in the first episode where the teacher who's given a lecture about the evolution of humanity says that if the 4 appendage creatures became dominant in society, they probably wouldn't have had discrimination, since the only difference between all of them would have been superficial things like hairstyles and skin color, which is probably the funniest thing that this show says. In the same way that we learn about how people function in society, we also learn how they function biologically. Characters are designed around an evolutionary logic, and again, it's well thought out and creative. Centaurs have strong ligaments to hold their body upright. Angelfolk's wings aren't used for flying, they're used for heat retention. Species with animal ears won't have human hairs on the side of their head. Instead, it will just be a smooth space. And that's where Centaur's Life hits a unique snag. Yeah, biologically speaking, maybe having 2 sets of ears would be redundant. Design-wise, though, it's what I would call very unnerving. Everyone looks like they have these long, egg-shaped heads. And yes, it does play into the otherworldliness of a centaur's life, but it still looks really strange. And I think deep down the author knew this, because a lot of the characters, specifically the females, will have their hair styled to cover the empty space, so we can't constantly notice the lack of ears. It's so distracting. Honestly, just try and watch the scene without being hyper aware that they just don't have anything there. And in one of the only examples of a female character who has their ear space exposed, the animators forgot that she wasn't supposed to have ears and then just gave her an ear. I hope someone got fired for that blunder. I'm sure they fixed it in the Blu-ray, but honestly, I didn't check. I actually also remember another scene when I was watching it back in 2017 of Himeno having just like her, you could see her lobe in like a shot. I shouldn't have been there either. You doing your fucking jobs properly? The designs by Internal Logic are accurate and authentic, and that is something worthy of praise. It makes a centaur's life captivating to observe, like a wildlife documentary. But it misses a pretty important part of character design, which is aesthetic. Like the merfolk, they just have human legs that blend into flippers, so it's just smooth skin from the thigh gap down. It's really uncomfortable. Speaking of uncomfortable, here's a diagram of how centaurs use the toilet. There we go. Did we need to know that? Did we need to see that? Did we gain anything from visualizing that? I didn't. I also could have sworn at one point they stipulated that centaurs can't wipe their ass if they get too fat, but where that's said has been lost in my notes. Honestly, the medical level examination of inspection we're provided makes certain scenes uncomfortable, I guess. It makes a little more sense if you consider the direct translation of A Centaur's Life, which is A Centaur's Worries. So it's understandable that certain personal struggles that Himeno faces as a centaur would be brought up, like how in the first episode she's worried that this scaffolding won't support her weight, and in another episode we learn that she's sought after as a model because centaurs are pretty scarce, but the school doesn't allow part-time work, or that Himeno can run fast but she can't run as fast as other centaurs. But when we get into the more private details is where ACL starts to lose me. And I get anime will always be anime, but sometimes I just wish it was less anime. The website's still active, and one of the merchandise they sold was one of those mouse pads with the soft bit. And the soft bit was a horse ass. I don't care about those struggles, Himeno. And if that's illegal, arrest me. Seriously, arrest me. Because that's what they do in A Centaur's Life. With all these different species inhabiting such a tiny space like the entire world, it created a cultural powder keg. And when it popped off pretty hard. The world in A Centaur's Life is one deeply scarred by the devastating and bloody wars of its past. And although now is a time of peace, there's this ever-present fear that it could start all again. So much so that Japan's ruling government has an iron grip over every aspect of society. The education system, the media, even your freedom of speech, enforcing one single rule. You cannot discriminate for any reason. Saying or doing something that could be considered discriminatory can get you arrested and sent to a correctional facility. People show a genuine fear that one off comment might be overheard by an undercover agent and then they'll be whisked off to the gulag. Soldiers hang around with guns, shadowy people monitor the teachers to make sure they're saying the right thing, propaganda is openly played on the TV. There were so many times during my watch through where something would just be said and make me double take and wonder if what I heard was correct. For instance, there's this part where some magical girl show is playing on TV. And in the show, the class of kids are having a vote on what to play for free periods, exercising their democratic rights to vote. They settle on the majority vote of dodgeball. But the girl taking the vote says that in the future, they'll use a system that can accommodate the will of the minority. And this upsets one of the students in class, saying that to deny the majority is to deny democracy. Then the magical girl uses the power of ethics and law and logic to transform and beat him up, saying that his view of democracy is warped. That's what they show to the kids in this world. And that's not the only example of child indoctrination. It's a world that's so scared of its scars, it's bandaged every part of its body. And it's endlessly fascinating to peek through the gauze. It's actually pronounced gauze. And so, in my last video, someone said my pronunciation of Japanese words was bad. Well, guess what? So's my pronunciation of English words. Again, Mei Murayama has shown a great talent in environmental storytelling. In an interview with Tokyo Manga Lab, he points out that there are no seats on the train, so everybody has to stand. because not every species can sit down like the rest. It's a world where if a system doesn't benefit everyone, it shouldn't benefit anyone. It's such a compelling world to see what extent the government would go to just to make sure discrimination doesn't happen, even at the behest of the citizens it's trying to protect. Like how the angel folk have trouble getting haircuts, because if anything happens to their little halo thing, they need to file a police report to say that it wasn't discrimination, just so the hairdresser doesn't get fucking executed. The extended world outside the Friends bubble is equally as compelling. The international climate is drip-fed through little tidbits here and there that never fail to bring up a million questions. Why is America under democratic communist rule, and why are they at war with the Antarctic snake girls? It's almost like it's deliberately being made confusing and mysterious. But those little hints are all you're really going to get. First and foremost, Centaur's life is supposed to be a slice of life, so we can leave all the political intrigue to, I don't know, think of another anime and dub it over in editing. I like the nonchalant approach the trio have to just spouting out something completely insane, though. It makes the world feel lived through. But unfortunately, it doesn't really hold up under any kind of scrutiny. And I don't mean political scrutiny. I mean narratively. There are blatant contradictions if you really consider what's happening, which I'm sure stems from Murayama's unique method on how he lays out series, as in he doesn't have one. In 2 separate interviews, when asked about how his stories are planned, he responded with, "I don't write plots." And when he was asked if there's some kind of memo of notes about the world, he says, "There's nothing in particular." Why? Because that's a lot of manual work. His words, not mine. Now, I'm sure lots of slice of life anime authors just make things up as they go along. I know for a fact that Nomori of Yuri Yuri thinks of most of her stuff in the gym, but that works if your story is set in our world. As A Centaur's life has many moving parts and apparently no notes to keep things on the right track, you get moments where pre-established rules are just forgotten about. In the Centaur's worlds, the Antarctic snake girls are probably the most mysterious species. They live on an isolated continent, and they are one of the most animalistic out of all of the species on the planet. They're almost alien in nature and are treated as such. The world is rife with conspiracies and misinformation about them, so when one comes to Himeno's class, she reacts badly. Himeno is quick to defend herself, saying that she's not discriminating. She's just scared of snake people because of a horror movie she watched when she was younger. So she's not discriminating. She was just negatively reacting to preconceived notions. Himeno and the snake girl watch the movie and conclude that it's scary, but it's just a movie, and it's not indicative of their species. And the two go on to be friends. So, if there are anti-discrimination laws that are so sensitive, you can be arrested and thrown into a brainwashing factory for assuming someone dyes their hair, why is a movie that irreparably damages the representation of an entire species allowed to exist? And before you say, maybe those stringent rules don't apply to snake people, that's not true. They absolutely do apply to them. There are 2 separate occasions where characters say that discrimination against snake people warrants the same punishment as discrimination against any other species. So why is this movie shown on TV? Let alone why does the school, which is monitored by the government, have a copy just lying around? They even suggest the snake girl can sue the makers of the movie. So again, under the logic of this world, why does this movie exist? I get wanting to have a story where Himeno is challenged on her notions of something, but it's weird that they had to break the big rule to do it. Centaur's life has this storytelling quirk that I don't think I've ever seen in a series before. And I really hope you understand what I'm about to say, because I find it really difficult to fully articulate. So bear with me here. Okay, you ready? This might be one of the strangest things I've ever had to try and explain. You know how a story happens and characters are in the story and then they do things that progress either the overall plot or themselves as a character? A Centaur's life doesn't do that. Instead, it's so literal with what's happening. An event will be set up to happen, and then they just do it with no fluff. Do you get what I mean? Like they'll say, oh, remember that nice thing that happened last spring? Let's remember it. And then they do. Every detail, even if it's unrelated to their conversation. Even details that they themselves would be unsavvy to because they weren't there. They remember other people's memories. It's so strange. There's this one bit... Sorry, it's really funny. I don't know why I find this bit so funny. There's this one bit where Kyoko, the goat girl, walks up to Himeno and says, oh, you have a smartphone? And Himeno just goes, yeah. And then the conversation ends.
Oh, no, you got a smartphone, huh? Yeah, it's so cool. Now, here, let's see.
Like, what? Why did she say that? Like, once I noticed that this was happening, it became the funniest thing ever.
More of a mom than a class president.
I'm sorry, but what does the word mom mean?
What do you mean, what's a mum? Did no one tell you? What's going on? Why did you say that? I'm going to stipulate on this a bit more. The reason I think it's weird that she says this is that she's been, like, trained on mainland culture. Like, she knows the language, she knows all the mannerisms. She should know what a mother is. Matter of fact, later on she goes to explain what a mum is in her culture. She knows what a mother is. But apparently now she just doesn't know. Stories will suddenly shift perspective or time completely on a whim. You'll be halfway through one story and then suddenly it's another one with different characters and then you'll be back to the other one. Like, here's a breakdown of one. At one point of the story, Kyoko, the goat girl, is helping her dad with work. She then notices that the class president is outside her house talking to one of her neighbors. We then switch to the class president pulling an actual spirit purification scam, and then we're just watching her do that for a few minutes. Then it goes back to Kyoko, and they talk about making dinner or something. Then it goes back to the president entering her own home and then being a bitch to her dad. And if that feels like a really empty synopsis, well, it's pretty indicative of the actual segment. And while we can see the parallel of how working shapes their relationships with their father, the entire segment is so short and it flip-flops so quickly, you can't really grab hold of anything to see how it builds on the characters. So by the end of the segment, you're still not too sure who these people are or why you were shown what you were shown. It just seems so afraid of sticking to someone or something. There's setups but no payoffs. For example, there's an archery competition. Himeno makes a bet with her underclassman that if she wins, she'll go on a date with her. The underclassman wins or something, and then they go on a date. From episode 1, we know that there's some kind of romantic undertones between Himeno and the elf imp girl, Nozomi. So I guess Nozomi might have some strong feelings about Himeno going on a date, yeah? There might be conflict, drama, impish hijinks, forlorn, longing looks as the woman of her dreams holds hands with someone else. Nope, Nozomi doesn't care. Matter of fact, we don't even get to see the date because the segment ends before, they go on it. So, nice save there, guys. Something interesting might have happened. Maybe that's for the best, because the other time that we see characters go on a date, it's with the snake girl and some guy we've never seen before, and they just go to an art gallery and talk about art. Engaging. Oof. It sounds like I'm just complaining about dates now. I went on a date once, and she left halfway through to go find a job. It's true, by the way. That's actually what she said she was doing. There's always some other perspective to jump to, or a flashback or something. So by the end of it, you don't really get a clear understanding of these characters, because none of them were really allowed to shine in the spotlight. And anything you might know about them is not really necessary to remember, because it doesn't come up again. It's like the opposite of Chekhov's gun. And I know it's a slice-of-life anime, but those are typically low-stake character-driven stories, not no-stake character-suggested stories. Like, I can't stress enough how events will be set up, or characters will say something, and then the scene will just change to something completely different. Or even if it does happen, it just kind of happens. Then episode 9 rolls around, and the first segment is a retelling of the life of a French frogman from Africa. The story explores the idea of an individual being from two worlds but not quite fitting in with either. Once again, it's an interesting situation to consider, but amounts to not much. It's all dedicated to the Frogman, someone who was introduced minutes before and never comes up again after. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel or take away from this. Is it a feel-good story of a guy finding success against all odds, or am I supposed to feel bad that he was pulled from his world and forced to learn French? Where's the centaur? What does she think about this? Not much, apparently, but whatever, there's still more time in the episode. I wonder what the centaur's going to be worried about today.
Did we say you could stop? Hey, we don't take breaks around here.
And if you read the manga... Why is he an angel? Are you saying something? What are you saying with that? What do you mean he's an angel? Yeah, so this is what a centaur's life is most known for, and it's jarring to say the least. Especially if you're like me and you didn't know this was coming. In episode 6, we were learning about how centaurs shit. In episode 9, we're learning about one of the worst horse atrocities ever committed. How fear and desperation can turn brother against brother in an effort to survive. That even in hell, there are glimmers of hope and kindness, and that no good deed goes unpunished. In episode 11, we learn about flowers and shapes. Now that's a certified whiplash. They of course alluded to war, so the idea that there was some kind of ethnic purging within this world's history isn't unexpected. But to actually see it, to be in the prison walls, to have our faces pushed into the mud, blood and horseshit, literally becoming a prisoner in a horse camp, it's bold, it's new, it's refreshing, I guess. In this story, we follow an angel boy.
Stop!
Who gets dragged into one of the work camps. During his time in there, he forms a bond with a centaur prisoner, who takes care of him and defends him from the hostility of the other prisoners. Eventually, the Americans, maybe, liberate the camp and rescue the angel boy, but not before his friend is hung, or hanged. It then flash forwards to modern day, and he shakes hands with the frogman, where you can see his thumb sort of phase through the frog guy's hand. And I'm really not trying to sound like a broken record, but what are we doing? What is this? I don't know what I'm supposed to take away from this. The entire episode is called What is the Life of Someone Known as a Prominent Figure Like? It's exploring how significant life events can alter and shape a person, but it feels so strange to be pulled away from the characters we know, who we should have some kind of emotional attachment to be shown that the frogman and the angel boy shake hands, to be shown that they're not racist. It feels like a filler episode in a series that already feels pretty thin. And I think thin is the best way to describe a centaur's life. It's like making a sandwich, but you spread in the filling so thinly and gently that there's no strong flavour. And the filling might be really nice. It might be the best, most interesting filling in the world, but if it's barely there, what are you doing with the sandwich? There's a lot to like about a centaur's life. The trio of friends are really nice when you actually spend time with them. There's a lot of creativity on display with its world building and construction of the people in the world. In that respect, it deserves a watch solely because you'll never find anything quite like it. But how things just stop and start is so confusing and off-putting. It'd be like if I was to end this video by suddenly saying, late last year I saw a man splayed over the pavement in my neighbourhood. He was dead.